dialogue today will be, how do we think about personal inventory? What information are we looking for? And then how do we apply it to think about our careers? And then getting a little bit into how to actually evaluate opportunities and a little bit into personal brand, because it actually weaves in pretty nicely. So that's the idea. So I will say that there are slides that I consistently use across most presentations. So if you've been to other ones before, some are going to be familiar. A lot of that's intentional. I'll show you in a little bit. But the idea is that, getting into a frame of mind around career planning, I think is kind of a big deal. I wouldn't say it's exclusively to this, to the US, but there's a challenge here with career preparation planning is that we expect individuals to manifest their own destiny. We expect individuals to be experts on everything about themselves, then how to apply it in all times and all ways and all places to get to all the things that they want. But the thing is, we have mechanisms for doing this in other disciplines, like the things you study and there's frameworks and how do I go use this. But when I came across and trying to navigate my career, it became frustrating to not know what to do with the information that was inside of my head and how that could be relevant to the opportunities. And recognizing, how do I step back from the fact that I am not my degree, I am not my vocation, I'm not my certifications exclusively. So how do we think about careers from a more objective, and I would say we think more in verbs than in nouns. So, how to apply that. So those of you may have seen this before, those of you who've not, I imagine all of you recognize this brand. So when you see this logo, what comes to mind for you guys?
Is right there.
Uber.
Perfect. So how many have used it? What's your experience been?
I found it to be like quick and easy, like fuss-free, pretty straightforward.
Awesome.
Kind of same here. I've never really had any issues with it, but they also have a pretty good infrastructure if you do have problems, which is nice. So it's pretty
Perfect.
convenient.
Ease of use, convenient, reasonably inexpensive, great
Good
alternative.
conversation with the drivers.
Yeah, perfect. And the fact that you can tell your driver now what kind of conversation you want to have with them, if you want to have a conversation at all. I've been an Uber driver, so I have some appreciation for that. How about their sort of national image? I think actually international as well. Legal precedents in California, sort of some devastating brand, how they treat their employees, or if they're employees at all. So it's a variety of aspects. How many of you have used this one? How would you compare them?
I personally like Lyft better. I think they're usually a little bit cheaper. And I've just had better experiences with them.
Yeah, I also prefer Lyft.
Yeah, I do as well. Honestly, it seems like a little bit more personable, I've felt, and almost a little bit more like professional.
How's it for cost? Is it less expensive? Is it easier to get access?
Lyft is definitely less expensive.
Is it?
Yeah. On average, yeah. I usually compare both just to kind of make life a little easier and make the best decision, but it usually ends up being cheaper.
So all things being equal, how many of you have a preference for Uber? How many for Lyft? And how many don't have a preference at all?
Kind of more in that boat, I think.
Perfect. So this is not an exercise in brand recognition and management, but this is a framework and a way of thinking, because the exact same process that we use to discern between two similar brands in the same category is the exact same process a hiring manager uses to discern between two eligible candidates for the same job. So when we were just deconstructing our experiences, Every one of us has some similar ideas of what those things are, but we have different attributes, we have different preferences, we have different awareness of these things, we have different experiences for these things, and that informs our choices about how we want to think about, engage with, use, etc. Works the same way with jobs. So what we're trying to do from a career services perspective is how do we help our students and alumni become the preferred candidates for all the opportunities they seek in their career. In order to do that, it takes information. So how do you get to those preferences? How do you become aware of those experiences? How do you become aware of awareness in general? Just because this is just representative of two similar things that we probably have some experience with, but you think about it, brands are permeating our lives all the time. We are not exclusively brands. We are complicated, interesting, amazing individuals. But if we start thinking in some of these terms, we start pulling away from what a thing is and thinking more about what makes it what it is. So that has an analog to, I think, to career planning. So before getting into sort of the weeds a little bit about how to sort of think about those details, this slide is in every presentation that I give. I think it's absolutely essential, is recognizing the fact for, everybody, there is a career planning process. I think for a lot of us, if not all, for many of us, if not all of us in our careers, how do we figure, we like what we're studying, we may have an idea, maybe know exactly what we want, maybe we have no idea what we want, we just like applying these things, or maybe we like what we want to do something different. Recognizing the fact that everybody falls along this continuum at any given time is very helpful, and career services is great about helping meet you where you're at in this place. When people think about career planning and strategy, particularly I think in higher ed setting, it's more of a tactical transactional engagement. For instance, I think we ask a lot of folks, how do you like to engage, and what kind of help do you need? Like, I need a resume, I need a CV, I need help with my cover letter, I need help with interview prep, I need help how to execute on my strategy. And that's great. But one of the challenges that we end up facing is that it becomes a lot harder to execute a game plan without having a target to focus on. And that's true of everything. And this is very true in advertising. So how many of you have ever seen an advertisement on a billboard, on TV, in a radio, in a magazine, where you looked at it and you're like, I have no idea what they're asking or what they want me to do with this information? I totally have. It happens all the time. And the example I continue to give is the one that baffled me the most in my life, was being on I think it was the Orange Line years ago. And there was this advertisement with 3 pyramids and 3 dogs. And it took 4 stops to figure out that it was for vitamin water. And there was a little, but I was like, I was trying to look at this whole picture. But here's the thing, an advertisement doesn't have 4 stops for somebody to figure out what the advertisement's about. It's about speed and being able to translate information quickly. It is the exact same thing in your resume and your cover letter. You don't have a minute or 2 for people to discern information. But here's the thing, it's not typically the advertisement's fault that it wasn't clear what they were trying to sell. That challenge typically happens way before, at the initial stages of understanding, what are we selling, what are we offering, how do we want people to think about what we're doing, and what decisions do we want them to make? So do I need to know about vitamin water? Should I drink vitamin water? Is it better for me? So it's an untargeted document, and usually that's based on bad information. It's based on inadequate information. We don't know who we're targeting. We don't know what they're looking for. We don't know what those responses are going to be. If we create resumes in that vein, it is likely that people will not be able to discern fast enough and be focused enough, and they'll move on to something else. We're trying to prevent that from happening. But in order to prevent that from happening, it takes great information up front. Does that make sense? Kind of? So having the luxury of worked in branding and advertising a little bit makes this a little bit easier, but it really just is, have we talked to the people and what they're looking for? Do we have a product that they like? Are there a lot of competing products that do the same thing? What's Gatorade doing and what's whatever Propel doing? So I think people are trying to figure this stuff out. So what we're trying to do is say, okay, how do you step back all the way and break things down to fundamentals, which is critical. This is the personal inventory experience. So when we're thinking about a personal inventory, we're talking about what are the categories of information that are the most helpful to understand when looking at career and life possibilities. This has always felt, at least in my career earlier, felt very overwhelming because I have all this information and experience jumbled in my head without any context, and not having a place to sort of organize it, and then to not only organize it, evaluate it, and then value it for what it is. This is a way to take the complexity of our lives and our experiences and to categorize them into 6 areas to simplify that process. So why this? Like, why this? Why not another mechanism? Is that this is how you can deconstruct an opportunity, because every position description can be broken down into these 6 areas. That's critical because what ends up happening is that, and I'll get into this in a second, is that only focusing on 1 or 2 or 3 of these will limit the scope of possibilities for career options for all of us. So what are we looking at? What do we primarily look at? The first thing we primarily look at is interests and passions. So what do we like? What do we enjoy? What do we like doing? What's important to us in the things that we like to explore and understand? The thing with a framework like this, and this is also incredibly important, is to get out, try to extract yourself to the mindset that it's just focus on jobs and it's just focus on academic experiences. This is an inventory of us. It's an inventory of you. It's an inventory of the person that you are. So when you're thinking about interests, it might be mechanical engineering, but it could also be like butterfly hunting or storm chasing or whatever. But that's the dynamics, is that it is not, it is actually tangibly recognizing the things that we appreciate and enjoy. And there's a huge reason for that, and I'll get into a little bit, is that just because you study engineering, if that's the case, doesn't mean you have to be an engineer. And I think that's probably easily recognized. But what we're trying to do is put the other end of the equation, is say, this is what you can do with all this information and why it matters. So, and it's just as interesting from a framework like this to identify what you do not like or what is not interesting as what is interesting. It is completely fine to start with the process of like, this is not working for me. This is what's driving me crazy. It could be, I don't like to want to be an engineer. And that could be, or I'm not loving this discipline. But the one great thing about this framework, I think, and the way we take to use it, is that 2 things. One, it's just data, is that yes, there's emotion subscribed to everything that we put in this piece, but we don't have to act on anything. And just because we recognize something doesn't mean you have to fix it. And I think that's what can become overwhelming in career planning, is like, oh, I see this thing and I'm really frustrated about what do I do about it? If you don't like working in large groups or behind a desk 40 hours a week or this or that, or want these types of situations or want to work with these people, let's not focus on them. Because what ends up happening in career planning, when I started my career, I have a private practice that I've had for 10 years, is what most of my clients are 30 to 60. And what ends up happening is they haven't done a lot of this due diligence. They've worked in these jobs for 10 years. They're miserable in them and don't know what to do with them. Now they feel like there's maybe they have some golden handcuffs, or how do I make this change just later in life? I don't feel like I have as many options. We're trying to create a landscape where you have more choices and awareness much earlier and can pivot faster should you want to be doing something new and interesting, or get out of something that you don't want. So I think interests go, and the fact that your interests can be applied, interests can be vocations a lot more often than we think they can. And I'll show you, think about an example in a minute as well. Next things is skills and competencies. What are you great at? What are you good at? What are you good at and want to do more of? What are you great at and never want to do again? Which I imagine may be familiar for many of us. I certainly have plenty of those. But this is taking into consideration skills across the board. So this could be hard skills, data analysis, using Excel, but it could be soft skills like collaboration, communication, could be relationship management. So, but it could be archery. It could be, so making it could be skills in a variety of areas that focus on you. It could be, let's say you took piano lessons for 10 years and you still play like that. Those are things that are important, or music theory or whatever. The exercise is capturing information and not judging it before you get to it, right? So that's the thing that the career service is good at, and a lot, and what we're trained to do is we are trained to ask questions to get this information, but also have tools and resources that I'll show you that can also supplement those pieces. Because sometimes you want to have that conversation, sometimes you want to be self-directed in your own career planning. But this is critical because it opens up a lot of doors, because just because you know how to do a thing doesn't mean where you want to do it, how you want to do it, and who you want to do it with are relevant. So those are the things this is where most career planning stops. This is like those two boxes. What am I good at and what do I like? And that's excellent, but that's not a job. And that's certainly not a career. It's the rest of the other boxes that actually be able to look at a holistic opportunity. So we look at attributes and descriptions. How would you describe yourself? How would others describe you, or how do you perceive them to describe you? And how would you ideally like to be described? So these are the attributes and descriptions of you. What are the adjectives that align with the person that you are, and that doesn't, again, it's not positive or negative, but, you could have things like, it's, thoughtful, engaged, hopeful, but it could be stuff like, for me, it's like, impatient, frustrated, disoriented. So this becomes it's an iterative document or an iterative framework that does evolve and can evolve over time. What I've found is that doing this for a long time is that 75 to 80 to 85% of the stuff that we capture now stays true for the rest of our lives. And that becomes really helpful, is that, yes, this is a framework about how to start the process of deciding what type of things we want to do, but it's also a really good framework of thinking about what we might want to do or how we want to act, or the choices we want to make that don't necessarily focus directly on careers. So, and I'll get into that in a second. So, and we have inventory, and I'll show you a couple inventories that we have that can be helpful to do these things. So these are descriptions. And the other thing about descriptions is, this is sort of how we perceive ourselves. And these are vocabulary words you might use in a job interview. These are interviews you might use in your LinkedIn profile. These are things you might use in an elevator pitch. So they're not just limited. So we know these things you like, but why are you unique in this way? How do you perceive that? There was one thing that before I started my coaching practice, the last job I had was working for a big biotech firm. And one of the things that we did was we all did a personal assessment. So this is called Insights. For those of you who may have ever used a Myers-Briggs profile, it's kind of like that with colors. So each of these colors represents a sort of grouped up category of traits and experiences and skills, et cetera. So I was excited about this because I took my insight assessment. I'd done the Myers-Briggs. I was like, I know what I am. I am yellow, and I'm excited about being a yellow. So the exercise that we had is everyone took this individually, and then we got in a big group together. And then the first exercise that the facilitator did is everybody got up and was stuck a piece of paper on their back, taped to their back, with these 4 quadrants representing these 4 colors. And then everybody in the group, like 15 of us, all had sticky dots, 4 different sticky dots with the 4 different colors. And what we did is we went around the room for 5 minutes and everyone stuck the color on the back of the person of what they thought that person's core personality color was. Okay. So I was like, yeehaw, I'm a yellow. I'm going to be a yellow. This is going to be awesome. I go back to the table. I take it off my back, and everything on my back is blue. Everything, every single dot is blue. I was like, what is happening? Well, yellow was around coaching and empathy and human connection and relationships. And blue was about strategy and data and analysis and process and presentations, et cetera. So what was happening, and this was a huge catalyst for me changing careers, is that I wasn't being perceived by the person that I was trying to showcase. I was being perceived by my job. And it was devastating for me. It was devastating because what was happening is that I was being boxed in an external perception of what somebody thought my personality would be like given the job that I had. And that becomes a big deal to understand, because is that true for you? Is that, how I'm getting stereotyped by my vocation, but not by, and what do I want to do about that? Am I not articulating my own personal brand? There are two Matts at the same time. This does become a big deal, because when you start thinking about growing an organization, how you're perceived and how you grow in that space, I think there's an element of authenticity that can be helpful. It doesn't mean they can't be separated in some degree, but if there's a fundamental disconnect between, I care. Yes, do I care about what you do? Absolutely. But do I care about the person you are when you do it and how you do it? That becomes just as much of a big deal. And this becomes a very big deal later as our careers evolve, is that, a lot of times when our careers early on are based on our skills, what we can do. But as our careers progress and we grow in our jobs, we get more responsibility. A lot of our career planning and development comes out of the relationships that we have. So how does your boss value you? How do your colleagues value you? How do your subordinates value you? And does that make sense for that audience? Just some things to consider early on in career planning. And next is values and motivators. What is important to you? What's incredibly important to you? What gets you out of bed at the end of the day? What's exciting for you? And there is some overlap between these categories, which, to be fair, like you can put things in different categories. But I think about this as, I care about humanitarian efforts. I care about poverty. I care about climate change. I care about authenticity. I care about, meaningful connections. So it can be sort of a variety of pieces. And again, I'll show you some examples that we have that you can sort of to catalyze this. So I'm giving you a framework, but there's a bunch of tools we can use to get to this information. But here's the thing. So you could be having a job that meets the other criteria of your role. But if you're working for an organization, the job you're doing is great, you're paid well, they value what you're doing, it's meeting your expectations, but you really don't like the fact that they're dumping oil into the bay, like if there's an ethical disconnect, for instance, does that work for you? It doesn't mean you have to make a choice on that. It just means the nature of the organization, the values that it has a direct correlation a lot of times to how people value and enjoy the roles that they have. So when you are doing exploration to opportunities for your career, taking into consideration the ethos and the background and the types of things the organization does and the people think about within it also become very, very helpful to understand. It is not always easy to discern that information, but this is where, why we're here having these conversations. This is where informational interviews and like agendaless meetings become great. How can I talk to people in these organizations before I apply to them? What can I know about these places to make better sense of them? Is this a place that's going to resonate with me? And vice versa. Styles and preferences, absolutely fantastically important. So I think about this is, how do you like to work? How do others like to work with you? How do you like to be led? How do you like to manage? How do you like to lead? What's the worst boss you've ever had? So this is thinking about the nature of the actual work you're doing and who you're doing it with. How much do you, if you're on the bench, how much do you enjoy the bench? How much do you enjoy the writing process? How much do you enjoy this? How much do you enjoy, how much of that, does the work align with your disposition and your preferences? Do you want to be in a job that's 40 hours a week behind a computer when you want to be spending 40 hours a week or 25 of that working with individuals or connecting with customers or writing papers or whatever? So it's probably seems obvious, but I mention this because my former clients are the ones that haven't asked these questions of themselves before. Is that I don't like my job because I keep doing this over and over again. Or it could be like, or recognizing the fact like, I don't like my job. Well, recognizing like, okay, if that's true, you don't like your job, you don't like your degree. This is a way from a holistic framework is saying, what is it exactly that's driving me crazy? Because it's real easy, because careers are a very emotional thing, even though we might not feel that way. You're like, my job's not working. The reality is your job's great, but you hate your boss. All right, so then you have choices instead of becoming emotionally like, what can I do with that? Well, do I want to enhance and support my relationship with my boss? Do I just deal with it, or do I find another alternative to get out of the situation? Versus suffering in silence, which happens more often than not. What we want to be able to do is how do you identify the best case and focus on that? And last thing is goals and expectations. Is what are you doing this for? Like, who are you doing it for? Like, what are you trying to get out of this? Do you want raises? What kind of salary do you want? Like, do you want to buy a house? Like, do you want to have a family? Do you want to, reach enlightenment? Like, whatever those things are, but recognizing what are my personal and professional goals and expectations? I typically don't, give me some long shot pieces. Usually a framework like this, I'm thinking sort of 0 to 1 years, 1 to 3, and then 3+. And I think the shorter term things become a little bit more helpful and more tangible. But this becomes very important because from a practical element, because let's say you have these expectations, the type of work that you're going to do, the type of work you want to do, will it pay me enough to do that? Or will it be in the right place for that? Or will allow me to do the things that the other things that I want to, would allow me, because the reality is your goals and expectations could be aligned with your interests. They could be aligned with skill acquisition. They could be aligned in personal development. They could be aligned with values and improving style. So it doesn't have to be a tangible thing to be a goal or an expectation. It just has to be an understood thing. So me talking a lot about a framework of career planning and thinking, and I know it's a lot. There's a million reasons why this is valuable, but there's about a very tangible one. Except for industry-specific technical questions, every interview question you will ever get for the rest of your life will be out of these 6 categories. And that becomes very helpful to realize that it's simplifying complexity. And why we're capturing all these things is these are all fundamentals. I like to think of them as they're typically irreducible, is that there's nowhere to go with them. Like these are the things that matter to me. They don't all matter the same, and they don't all matter the same at the same time for the same reasons. But what you end up doing is the more you start exploring opportunities, you're going to be able to reconnect to the things that do matter the most. So it's not putting your thumb into the wind, deciding on options and ideas. That is a lot of information on a big sheet of paper. Does anybody have any questions about this way of thinking? Or how it might impact you?
It might be a little bit, I don't know, situation dependent. You mentioned, especially for the how do other people perceive you, that it wasn't until you actually got insight from others in that group that you realized that what you believed to be true about like who you were wasn't necessarily how people see you. I guess I'm wondering if that applies to all of these. Like, would it be helpful to talk to other people about what you're projecting? Like, I might think that I am good at chemical engineering, and they might be like, actually, I think you're better at bioengineering or something like that. Do you think that would be valuable for all of these, or do you think there's maybe a benefit in just kind of sticking with your guns, so to speak? Whatever you believe, you can kind of make it so.
Yes. So the thing that I think about career planning is that, and I think it's the same with things like networking, is that there's no one particular style or way to achieve the results we're looking for. I am an advocate for more information is better. So, and I think external perceptions are a huge deal. And since organizations have been doing this for a long time, like if you ever, you might get into, another organization, they might do a 360 evaluation. And if you've never heard of that, it's usually when, your manager evaluates you and your team members evaluate you. So it's doing these things within an organization. So that framework sort of exists in a lot of organization and company cultures, or some anyways. This is saying, let's do this way ahead of time. So for instance, there is a company called Reach 360. It's REACH 360. And what it is this. It is a personal, external personal brand inventory. And I think it's $15. And what it allows you to do, you can send a link to anybody with an email address that you can send it out to them. They get all this information. So it has a series of like questions and categories. So it'll ask you, top 10 perceived skills for this person, or top 10 perceived attributes of this person. Or and it will give not only places for them to check boxes, it'll also give them places to add verbatim responses. It'll also do clever things, which is, it's one of the ideas sort of came of that brand slide at the beginning is, if this person was a car, what kind of car would they be and why? But it's really fascinating because people end up getting these responses because the reality is it's not the car that matters. It's the fundamentals of that accumulated brand that they perceive in you. And that's really interesting. And so what it does, it gives an audience a variety of different ways. But what happens is that you end up getting a collection of information from external audiences, from whoever you choose, to give you very specific, I would say, qualitative feedback about your brand. So then if you've done your due diligence on yourself, then you see how well do they match. And I actually did this exercise, and I'll just share this with this group because it was a life-turning piece for me. Is that same company, same blue dots, and I got some feedback. I actually knew it's supposed to be anonymous, and it is, but I had a pretty good idea who responded to this particular one. And it was somebody had written down in a verbatim, like, what was a weakness, and they said, Matt has an overinflated sense of self. And it was literally devastating. I was like, what does that mean? Like, and this is, I think it was a little more specific, but what it forced me to do is to absorb somebody else's perception of my brand. And then who do I talk to ask questions about what does that actually mean? Is that truth for me? Is that truth for them? Does that make sense? But a lot of that had to do with this dichotomy between my work persona and my actual life persona, and how different they were, and the person I'm trying to be for the role that I'm having. So what ended up happening was there was just a disconnect between what I was trying to do and what I was trying to be and what I was. I know it's sort of a squishy way of thinking about it, and there was positive feedback too. But what I think is a tool like this is a great reflection tool, sort of mirror from the audiences that we have. But it gives you actual vocabulary words to do that, and 99% of the feedback you get is positive, in my experience. So
the Reach 360.
Yeah, Reach 360. It's really great, and I think there's a book connected with it, but just the piece online will do it. So that's one component. That's sort of, and I'll go through it. There's a few other assessments. Another assessment that I think is great is called a skill scan. And I'm bringing these up. These are not ones that we currently offer from career services. Just ones that we might use as one-offs or recommend. But skill scan, again, another $15 assessment. It takes 20 to 30 minutes to do. And what it does is that you take this assessment and it does some really interesting things. It looks at your skills categorically, so from buckets. Then within that bucket, it scores those buckets. Then within each of those buckets, it gives a list of skills within these categories And then not only tells you these are the skills, it tells you which ones do you love to do and are good at, which ones are you pretty good at and want to do, which ones are you great at and never want to do again. So it actually calculates and gives you direct feedback on your skill preferences. And that is huge, because I think, you know, in a way to be a sort of quantify what we think about these things can be helpful. And I can actually, I think I have an example right here. So this is, so this is a version off the Career Center website. So this is something you can download right now. So it is, and what I'm talking about, you know, this is a skills, this is just sort of a tangible skills inventory that you can do now. And I'll send you all 3 of them that we currently have. But when I'm talking about skill categories, social or numerical or investigative, physical, creative, analytical, managerial. So each of these are sort of compartmentalized. But this is a, you know, I'm giving you sort of one that does the legwork for you, but this is an assessment you have available right now where it gives you categories, each of these categories within those categories, and then you get to score them. It's not, you know, assessments are not designed to be they're not the full profile of us. Just as much as your Myers-Briggs profile is not your personality type. It is just good information to be able to use and sort of segment and value information at any given time. But it also reflects the fact, like, what we're trying to do, 1 is to identify things, and 2 is to amplify things that are working and things that are not. So we're trying to avoid the stuff that we don't want to do and do the stuff that we do. But we also have a values inventory. Can everyone see this on values? Did it switch over?
Yeah. So
the same thing. So this is, and what I think is helpful about it is that these are just things that are important, that may be important to you from a personal value or the environment that you're in, but you get to select, how important is this thing to me? So it's one is recognizing, one is how relevant is this? Okay, so you can score this information, but this is what I think is very helpful to understand with assessments. Again, it's all data points, is that the information that's being collected is sort of a truth until it's not. So the idea is that, let's say, whatever achievement is, or fast-paced environment in work environment is really important to you. But would you take a slower paced environment if these other 3 things that you also want could be improved? So what it's saying is that, and I'll make sure you're recognizing, it's never one lever that decides a job preference for somebody else. It's 100 of them. And I'll show you the mechanics of sort of how to deconstruct that in a second. And we also have an interest checklist. This is certainly not exhaustive, but I think it's an interesting catalyst as you're
like rearranging furniture.
But what's really fascinating about inventory, like interest checklists, I think they can be good reminders. You know, it's it doesn't mean, again, you know, it doesn't mean necessarily have to act on them. It does, but yeah, it reminds me, oh yeah, I do care about that. Like, I do want to make furniture at some point. I do want to do this at some point. Like, I do want to read this book sometime, you know? So I think they become sort of cues they're actually direct cues, like, yeah, that's a thing, or it gives you an idea of which to either search yourself or explore yourself, or work with a coach, or talk with, you know, communicate with other people about sort of those interests and ideas and sort of work them, sort of flesh them out. So we did, you know, so there are tools and frameworks. These are all of them. Another one we do have, which I think is helpful, half of it's helpful. Imagine PhD is another resource that is available to graduate students. This Imagine PhD is sort of a career exploration resource, particularly for humanities and social sciences. So exploration around, let's say, engineering is going to come up null. but the 3 assessments that it does have are very, very helpful as well. So again, another tool that's free to aggregate information. And all these are listed on the website, and like there's a login code. And this process, you know, is iterative, just like the personal inventory form is that. But what I can tell you from somebody as a personal coach and a career coach for a while is that one of the reasons I got into it is that I felt my career understanding exploration process took too long and was too windy, and that I was coming to a lot of truths a lot later in my career than I wanted to. And I think caused a lot of like frustration and unnecessary suffering. So that being said, you know, how long should that process take to get from who am I to what I want to do, and how do I go do that? You know, and it depends on different places. But I've sort of, you know, coming from a business background, businesses don't have 6 months to do anything. Like, how do we figure this out? Like decisions have to be made in days and weeks and in a few months. So when from my perspective of supporting graduate students is that I don't think career planning from this whole process needs to take very long. My typical engagements with former private clients are 1 to 2 months from the beginning to, you know, getting ready to do interview prep. So just recognizing the fact that I know this is a lot of pieces and meeting people where they're at. This doesn't have to, however you want to go through, you know, if you choose to do something like this, work collaboratively or work on your own terms, I don't think it needs to take a long time to get the information and start making choices and start engaging quickly. Because that, and recognizing is that your graduate students, you don't have time, like depending on what you're doing. So this is very different than working with undergraduate students. Like and having been a graduate student, like working full time and going to school mostly full time, like it's bananas. So like, how do I fit that in these pieces? And I think that's our approach that we try to take, is how do we make sure this is the most efficient for you guys based on whatever schedule you have. But recognizing this, you don't have to be doing discovery for 3 months to reach this level of awareness. My thing is you take a couple of weeks, you know, depending on what you're trying to do. So any questions about sort of discovery and inventory? You know, and how could, you know, are there things that we could be more helpful with? Are there things that feel like they're missing in this dialogue?
I mean, Matt, I have a quick question.
Of course.
Totally. So it's kind of, I mean, discovery, it seems like you're talking both about self-discovery, but I mean, like you and Jessica were discussing as well, a lot of self-discovery can be facilitated by understanding what other people perceive. At what point do you guide your own discovery while trying to gently factor in like other people's opinions? You know, like you don't want those to really affect your perceived happiness. And I'm just trying to like find a good balance between, like, I suppose, understanding yourself while factoring in like other people's opinions of who you are or what you're representing.
Yeah, it's a great question. One bar that I have, I think from a personal discovery standpoint, even before talking individuals, is that I think there should get to a place where an individual has cogent answers to specific questions that are directly relevant to them. So if I ask you a direct question, is that what lights you up? What's interesting? What do you hate? What's the most remarkable thing that's happened? What's the best compliment you've ever had? You know, what did you want to be when you were 10? Why do you study engineering? You know, who's your favorite person in the world? So I'm asked to ask you, that's just a bunch of different questions I just asked you, right? Mm-hmm. But all of those things that I just asked you are going to come out of those 6 buckets. So what I'm interested in people to understand is that I want people to have their own story first, because that's what matters to people. Is that, and you know, there's a slide later in this, but I'll get to it now, is that yes, do organizations hire for credentials? Yes. Do they hire for degrees? Yes. Do they hire for experience? Yes. But really, they hire, do we find you valuable? Has somebody else perceived you to be valuable? Do we now perceive you to be valuable? And do we like you? And then whether or not do we want to pay you? So half the equation is, can you do the job? But the other half of the equation is, do we want you to do it with us? So in order to get to that place, I think you have to sort of, truth is sort of probably too strong of a word, but I think about having a dialogue is that I want the introspection and the awareness and the embrace of the things that are us. I think that's a very good way to start that process. And and everybody falls along that spectrum. Again, I'm speaking from my own perspective, is it took, what of this sort of theme I was sort of mentioning is how long it took for me to sort of connect my Matt Casey that is and wants to be, and the one that's going to work every day. And those things have I think have blended together nicely into a career that matters. Like I can be exactly who I want to be, doing the thing that I want to do. And that the things that matter to me the most and the things that I want to achieve are directly aligned with the vocation that I've chosen. But the one thing I like about my job is that I'm not relegated to talk about business all the time. I can talk about anything. And what I like about this is that I believe, with some exceptions, everything can potentially be marketable in our lives. And that becomes a big deal. And it's, we decide what we want to select, but having succinct answers to the things about what you like, because then when you start doing is then when you start asking people, is that, well, are they hearing that? Do they believe in that? And then do I want them to know about that? Does that matter to me? So you can decide on your level of privacy, your level of comfort and exposure, but at the very minimum, to be able to answer direct questions and get direct answers from them is critical.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And, as you start recognizing is that, it's, again, any topics on the table, which is nice. So the example that I tend to give, sort of around career planning, around sort of thinking about interests, sort of failed to mention is, a lot of times we undervalue the things that we enjoy. Like there are things that we get, we derive pleasure and enjoyment from, and separate those from the things that we do. And that happens all the time. So the idea is that, for instance, I like basketball. Played a little basketball as a kid. Now watch basketball as an adult. It's cool with my family. I appreciate a lot of different pieces of it. But sports has been an escape from the thing that I'm doing. And I grew up, within 2 hours of Boston for most of my life. The Boston Celtics are a $2 billion company with marketing, sales, finance, operations, strategy, player development, So the thing is that, one of the questions to be able to this exercise, people being to ask themselves, is that, for this is something I enjoy. So if the president and the GM of the Boston Celtics sat across from me at the table and said, you could have any job you want, doing anything you want, and we'll pay you fairly for it, what job would that be? I have to have an answer for that question. If somebody gives the gift horse, I want to be able to walk it across the water. It's saying, but it doesn't mean I have to take the job. It's just recognizing if somebody says you could do something in an area that you love, what would that look like? Now, here's where the brand piece becomes interesting, is that if you ask the people in my life, most likely, they'd say you want to go be a head coach because you are a coach. So you're going to subscribe a vocation to me based on what I do. I don't want to be a head coach. I don't want the responsibility. I don't want the team responsibility. I want the managerial responsibility, and I don't want the leadership responsibility. But if I had that option, I would want to be the consigliere to the head coach. I would want to be their Jiminy Cricket and the person behind their ear, giving them advice on all different aspects without having the core authority with the people involved. That's the difference. I don't know if that job exists, but that's the one I'd create for myself if I could work in the thing that I enjoyed. Those are the kind of the extrapolation I want to be able to help students do, and graduate students and alumni, is you don't have to extract yourself. If you love engineering, great. What do you love about doing that? And who do you want to benefit from the work you're doing? What's the firm you'd love to work for? I want to go work for DARPA. Great. What do you want to do for DARPA? I want to go for Google X. Great. I want to do that. I want to go work for this. Okay. So what do you want to build? What do you want to construct? Who do you want to leverage it with? That's the way I want to be able to think, and I'd ask that question. Like, I might be a hard way to sort of get in an interview, but if I was having like an informational interview with somebody, I'd ask them that question. Like, what would you love? Like, or things like if you didn't have to or chose not to work for a year, how would you spend your time? How about 10 years? So then I'm going to start asking about what are your perceptions about how you value your time and how you want to contribute to yourself and the world around you, or not. Understanding those parameters, you're like, well, is there some there? Are there some jobs there? The things that I can get out of those things. Maybe it's not a job. Maybe it's recognizing something that complement. But what we're also trying to do is thinking about, yes, I want a vocation, I want a job, I want to get paid for what I'm doing. But it's also thinking about what is the combination of things in my life on a day-to-day basis that are going to make me the happiest. This process is all about intention. All of it.
I had one question kind of related to, I think, what you're saying. And I think I get a lot out of the 6 categories that you showed us, like determining what makes us like the happiest, or determining like what you're most interested in or how the ways you work best. But I struggle to figure out like, where do I have like leeway to make sacrifices for those? Because I can't have all those things, I feel like.
Sure.
So figuring out where I want to be able to make sacrifices, I think that's a question I still have.
Sure. I'm going to show you how to do that.
Okay.
How's that? But Kelly, that answers your question? Awesome. So I'm going to get into this quickly. I'm going to answer your question in the next, after the segment, but I just want to mention is that how do we quickly think about taking the stuff, the information that we have internally and externally, what do we do with it? So this is just a framework and a schematic. I will evolve this at some point. I don't love necessarily the framework, but the idea is that if you take this as a package and say the outer ring of this framework right now is you. Those are the 6 pieces of the inventory, right? So you can populate it or not, but just recognize that that's where that information goes. In the middle part of this, and one way to start thinking about career planning is how do I deconstruct an interest? And I would say, how do I break something complex down into what it is? So usually start with an interest. Not always. It could be a skill, it could be something else, it could be a value. But the idea is that, interest in the middle box could be anything. It could be engineering, it could be healthcare, it could be sports, it could be teaching, it could be anything you want. But this is where career planning, this is what I think really, really differentiates great career strategists and how the choices that they make is they understand the worlds in which they're looking to play. Because the reality is that there's complexity everywhere. Because if we just sat around and said, let's talk about healthcare. Okay, I worked in healthcare for 7, 8, 9 years, and it was amazing, and for that reason. But let's just say we mapped out healthcare. This is a 20-minute, 30-minute facilitated conversation I did a few years ago with a group of just talking about healthcare. This is me asking the audience what they thought about healthcare and writing it down on a big giant whiteboard. Half an hour, like there's an incredible amount of content on this page. This is not an exercise in trying to figure out what is on this page, but there's a lot. But everybody had a different perspective about how they experienced it, where they learned about it, what they've done with it, who they know about. Who are the providers, who are the gatekeepers, who's the managed care and who's managing the money, and what are the clinicians doing, what are the patients doing, what are the entities doing, what are the facilities doing, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a bit like, the idea is that this is a breakdown of something that can be nebulous and huge, and seeing the pieces, because what we want people to do is say, if I like this thing, what do I really like about it? Well, you may like 3 things about it, or you might like 10 things about it. The next thing is that, do I know enough about it to start pursuing opportunities? And if I don't, how do I learn more about it? Because this is, again, I allude to business only because we have these frameworks have been use forever is the idea is that when companies are trying to make decisions, they look internally first. Who are we? What do we have? What are our assets? How much money do we have in the bank? What kind of talent do we have in the organization? Then they're looking outside. All right, what's the competitive marketplace? What are the products? What are the services? What's the disruptive technologies? So they're mapping those things. Then they're deciding, well, what are we going to do? Do we want to make a new product? Do we want to take a product off the board? Do we want to add a new service? Do we want to buy a competitor? It's about giving choices. I think it's the same thing with people. They know the external landscape. What we want to make, I want to make sure people are able to do is be able to do that. Is that, you know, if you like robotics, that's great. That is in a massive, you know, a massive space that's evolving rapidly, and its applications are different, and the utility and the audiences are different. We are pretty good at helping facilitate these conversations. So let's say you're like, oh, you know what? I have a personal experience with medical devices. Like I have an insulin pump. So I'm thinking about, I would like to be able to work on something that makes people's lives better from a product side. Okay, great. Let's say instruments and equipment and medical devices. Okay, so this is just say one little section of one big universe. What we're trying to help people understand is how big those little tiny universes actually are. Like, this is just a market map from a third-party research company that put together a visual image of medical devices by, I would say, sort of, I was going to say disease state, but I'd say sort of, it's a little, sometimes it's part of your body, sometimes it's part of the tools and resources, but then you're seeing a whole compendium of organizations within these spaces. This is the kind of detail that is helpful for career planning, because what ends up happening down the line is without doing this real due diligence, you miss out on most of the companies that are available in marketplaces, because most companies aren't huge in promoting themselves. Most are mid and small size companies. They might pay the same, they might have the same jobs and roles as the big companies, but they aren't promoting themselves the same way. So in order to find out who they are, you have to do the research to get there. I can assure you this provides more options, and your competitors aren't going to be looking in this level of detail, because we don't teach it. We don't teach to go how to go figure that out. Like, what is that universe, and where to even start with that process? And I think that's what we're pretty good about in the career services standpoint, is how to get to that information. So, quick summary about this is, if you're interested in something, we can help you think about and dialogue and break it down into its pieces, and then talk about resources of how to learn more within that spot. CB Insights actually has a fair amount of free service and information. We don't have, this is where the library becomes very, very helpful. Tish has a lot of resources, and this is something that I'm trying to aggregate, is sort of bring in sort of market intelligence into the conversation. So things like Dun & Bradstreet, which is a great way to look at like huge businesses, and there are other ones. We're trying to find and work with the library to bring in more of these resources. To your point, Jessica, is to make this a little bit easier, so you don't have to go find them. At least if we have a directory, this is where you can look for them. And maybe we have access, maybe other schools at Tufts have them, maybe your alma maters have them. So it's a work in progress. All right, so targeting. So this is, Logan, this is to your question. So how do I make those decisions? This is a position description for a role that actually existed within the last year. This just happens to be for diversity, equity, inclusion program manager position for an ed tech company in Boston. So within this framework is all this information about what this role is. What we want to help people do is, how do we break this down into stuff that we've already done our due diligence on, and then how do we make a decision? So this is a framework for looking at the responsibilities of that job. So this information on this page is taken directly from the previous slide. So when it's saying, lead our cross-functional DEI working group in the first box, it's saying this is, what I'm asking, somebody to look at is say, given what they're asking for, the responsibility for this job, how transferable are my existing skill sets? How well do they align? If they don't perfectly align. Where are the gaps that what would I have to do to achieve, to get to the place where that'd be the most effective in this role? But the other question I'm asking people to ask themselves is, how interesting is that responsibility to you? Because this is a case of, just because you can do something doesn't mean you want to do it. So if and this becomes very critical. You start saying, like, if the top 3 things that they're asking for, and having written a lot of position descriptions, we typically tailor the position descriptions for the most important thing first, the second most important thing second. If the top 3 things in this job are things that you would be great at and don't want to do, you don't have to do anything with the information. But it's recognizing that. And I based this off of quantitative, a 1 to 5. So 5 being my interest is off the charts perfect. 1 is I don't even want to think about ever doing this type of work ever. And so same thing with transferable skills. So the idea is that it's just a slightly more objective way to break down what somebody's looking for and how we map to it. And doing the same thing for qualifications. So what do I need to be, what do I need to have for them to want to talk to me about this role? But this is the thing about this, is that there are specific qualifications that they're looking for. Like, all right, this job wants 5 years experience. We want some, and some access to D&I and learning and development, talent development. You can decide whether or not how well you map to that. How you do, what kind of, leadership role. But then this is not just exclusive to skills anymore. When this is saying we're looking for an excellent collaborator, it's asking about soft skills. So you have to start thinking about your collaboration experience and how well it's done and what you've done in school and what you've done in your work. So it's not just asking about skills and interests. Then it starts getting into attributes and values and preferences and goals. So because you've done all that work already, you can map it directly to this thing. That makes sense to me, as opposed to just sort of guessing. With the idea, and this is, directly to sort of Logan's question, is how do I evaluate all the parameters and all the levers at the same time? This is one way to do it. So this is, I call it the career path evaluation matrix. This is a balanced scorecard. Many of you may have already used one in other roles before. It's the way to score and evaluate different things and look at them in concert. So what this is designed to do is say, based on this job, the DI program manager job at Panorama Education, how do I map to this role? So you've done your work on this previous slide. It's saying, okay, based on what I know about this job and the research that I've done, I believe my role and skill alignment is a 3. Like, there's still some work to be done, but I think I'm pretty good. But from an interest and passion, I love the organization. I love ed tech. I love this type of work. I think it's a need to be doing, and I can't wait to get involved with it. Again, values and motivators. Well, I think it's a 4. Styles and preferences. This job would be, it's too many hours behind a desk. It's too much time working with clients and not directly with customers, etc. So what you're doing is you're getting an aggregate, and then you score this as an aggregate score. The only difference between this and the personal inventory is I added a lifestyle logistics alignment bucket. That is purely asking, does it pay, how does it pay? How are the benefits, and where is it located? So really practical things like that cater to people. So why think about it this way? Well, what it allows you to do is sort of evaluate each individual component of a role and score and look at an aggregate score. I do not particularly care so much about the aggregate score, because the score in of itself is meaningless. It's relevant in relation to all the other opportunities you look at. Because the idea, if you looked at this map, everything would, the best, everything was a 5, everything would score a 30. But you may be more conservative in how you approach this, or the numbers you get. But what ends up happening is that the idea is the higher the score, the more likely there's a fit for that. But here's the thing. Questions to ask yourself about a job that may not come out of a different framework is that for this role, what would I have to do, or what would need to take place for my skill alignment to be a 5? What would have to happen in this role for my personality and style alignment to be a 5? What would have to happen from lifestyle logistics to be a 5? So then what you're doing is you're identifying categorically what the parameters of optimization are for a role. So then you're not throwing the job out anymore. You're saying, well, this is the type of I'm amplifying the things that I have to remember that I really want in these jobs. how can I look for roles that meet these criteria? You know, and maybe you're shooting too high from a title perspective. Maybe the marketplace that you're looking at doesn't have as much of a population of opportunities. Like, you know, you want to live in Albuquerque, but Boston has all the jobs. So, but could you, you know, what's the compromise in these pieces? So what it allows you to do is how to optimize an option to look at what you'd love to be able to do. What it also allows you to do is look at any opportunity against any other opportunity at any time. So an example that I always give is that, you know, I think it would have been cool to be an astronaut. Like, I think that'd be amazing. But, you know, working for NASA or Blue Origin or whatever. But if I put astronaut and NASA in this box, if I went through the exercise, well, I'm not a pilot, I'm not in the military, and I don't have an engineering degree. So that's off the table. So what I've just done is said, I'm no longer going to consider any options in this place. But here's the thing, is if I looked at from an interest perspective, what NASA does and what it means and what it's trying to achieve, that's a 5. If I look at values and motivators, same thing. If I look at work style, oh, the people are great, they value these things, they connect with these, they're smart, they're dynamic, they're trying to change the world, great. Goals and expectations, same. Lifestyle, it's in my backyard, it pays amazing. So what you end up looking at is saying, instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, it's not that, maybe it's not astronaut, but it's like, what kind of vocation could I have at this place that I would love to work at? So then you're starting to recognize that it's not one lever anymore. You're literally looking at dozens, if not hundreds at the same time. This is a way to sort of normalize it quickly to make faster decisions. Because that's what we want to be able to people to do is the idea is you can physically populate this document, and I've actually color coded it. So you even want to heat map it, you can do that. So like 5s are greens, 3s and 4s are yellows, and 2s and 1s are reds. Like, so you can start looking at these things. You're like, well, this would be great for these reasons. This would be great for these reasons. If I embrace this and change these parameters, it would get this to here. What would take it down? So then you're having a much more objective evaluation of an option over time. I know, again, it's a conceptual exercise. You know, I work with, I'll actually score with people in real time. One great way to do this is if you've had a job before, score it. If you want to score your degree program, score it. If you want to score somebody else's job, go for it. Because what it ends up being, you're no longer bound by parameters anymore. Because it could all be 1s, and that's fine. But what if you find out it's not just 1s? What if you find it does matter? What if you find out, like, because what ends up happening is you could have 5 different jobs that score really high for the same high score for 50 different reasons. So you're like, this job is just as exciting to me as this job. They're not exactly the same, not in the same place, not doing the same thing, but I'd be just as my overall happiness and comfort with this role would likely be the same. That's great to recognize. Then you can play with the parameters. You can play with the adjustments instead of winging it. But yeah, so all of this stuff is a methodology and a way of thinking and sort of translating this information for you. And that's helpful. My hope is, in best case scenarios, is I work with all of you and be able to go wherever, if these exercises are helpful in these places to figure it out. This exercise will make your process faster. And the other reason this exercise works is that this is the end of sort of the strategy part of career planning. You've done discovery, you've done exploration, and then you've done targeting. Targeting is everything. Knowing what you're looking for makes all the tactical stuff easier, because once you know what you're looking for, what your job search strategy or internship strategy looks like is going to be tailored specifically to that role. Your marketing documents will be tailored to those experiences. Your networking relationship management strategy will be tailored directly to what the behaviors are. Even so much like for job search, like, if I'm looking at this job and this is heavily recruiting heavy, so I'm going to work with a lot of, placement agencies, versus this one is very specifically word of mouth, and I'm going to have to be working with a lot of associations. That's sort of the way that makes everything easier. And why targeting is that you don't get to a place where once you have the targets, you can message appropriately and have the answers to the questions that people are asking. So when you get to your documents, like, oh, that's why it's completely focused on that area. When somebody's in your interview and they ask you, why should we hire you? Or you know, what makes you valuable, or what's interesting about you, or, you know, how can you help us? You have an answer for that question because you've already done the work. So I know it's a schematic, but yeah, again, the whole intent is hopefully simplify complexity a little bit. And it is not, these are tools that I like to use and have built and worked with. They are not everything. There are plenty of other options and ways to think about. Everyone has a unique situation, so recognizing nobody's bound to all of these pieces. But I think it's helpful to understand that, you know, we do really think about this from a very practical and analytical place, as well as a compassionate and empathetic place. I think it's that collaboration, and it's why I think a lot of us do what we do, is you get to, you know, we get to do a lot of these things. And the fact that we spend a lot of time talking with employers, recruiters, to understand what's happening in the marketplace all the time. So I get, you know, that's the luxury of this. I get to talk with engineers. I get to talk with engineering companies. I get to talk with people that are doing it, or alumni that have gone there. What, you know, what's happening, what's going on, what's emerging. So not only to have a dialogue about a process, but actually having an actual dialogue about the roles and the mechanisms and the actual stuff that's going to be done in these things. I think that's certainly important to us.
Yeah, I have a quick question about that too. I love this, and I'm already thinking about sharing it with a lot of my friends who, you know, have actually loved the job that, you know, when they started. And actually,
Kelly, you sound a little bit like a Star Wars robot. You want to maybe type it in the chat? Sorry, I don't know what's going on.
Does it sound any better if I do this?
Yeah.
Totally. So I was just saying, like, how frequent is it, or how often can you reassess like the same position? So I have plenty of friends who have, you know, something that looks like that sort of a heat map goes into this job. They spend 2 years at the job, and now all of a sudden, you know, they feel like they're not getting paid as much, or, you know, they find out more about the company's ethics and, you know, dislike that or like it more. And, you know, each company is sort of like a living organism in of itself. And at what point do you look and say, you know, this, which used to be ranked a 30 is now ranked a 20, and I have plenty of other opportunities that are in my mind ranked 25, you know, and like, at what point can you, is it okay to reassess and say, you know, this is why this became less important to me, and here's a career path switch I'm looking into?
Yeah, I think it's honestly almost in real time, which I think that's the whole point, is that it's the ability to recognize. Well, it's helpful because the beauty of this is how much work you've done up front, which is, this is hard. Like, then people recognize, like, even the questions I brought up, you may never have been asked before, like things that matter to you and value, things that are like, oh, is that really part of the job, or is that really meaningful? Once you've done done that work, and yeah, it's iterative, but you're like, to be able to identify quickly what the things that aren't working, as opposed to the visceral experience you're having, is critical. You're like, you know, this is driving me crazy. You're like, oh, it's my hours, but is it really my hours? Is it really how my boss is, projecting his own stuff onto my things and layering them off? So it's not really, it's the hours are driving me crazy, but it's the expectation my boss has for the job and doesn't value it the way I want them to. That's where you get to. So then you can start, so the evaluation criteria gets specific versus, and it doesn't take the emotional part out of it, it's still critical, but it does allow you to make decisions. And that's what we're trying to do, is that, I sort of mentioned it very early, just because you recognize something doesn't mean you have to do anything with it. And that's helpful to know. But, you know, telltale signs, yeah, is that there's, you know, anger, frustration, depression, sadness, like things that, like, and being present for the emotional piece of a lot of this stuff. You're like, this is not working for me. Or it could be like, the commute's too long. Like, I can't, but then you're deciding, it's not binary. It's like, you know, it's, instead of saying, well, I can't do this job anymore because I'm commuting 10 hours a week, it's what would make that better? Like, what would make it 5% better? What would make it 50% better? Like, would commuting 1 day a week or working remotely, how much stress would that alleviate? How about 2 days? So then you can start getting practical on the solutions that you're looking for, and then getting to a place where like this, and it doesn't take long to figure out like this is an untenable situation. Like my physical well-being and wellness is depleting, and recognizing this is a framework that is sort of, it's built around careers, but the reality is you could put anything in one of those boxes and evaluate it. Do I buy a house? Should I have a family? Should I quit my job? Same way to do it. So what this really has been designed to do is a decision-making tool that expedites that process. So doesn't mean we don't experience and the things that we're experiencing. It just means we don't have to be trapped in a loop of observation and experience without execution or action. So it's helpful, and I stand by it. Like, my wife and I, we bought a house. We moved 90 miles away from Tufts 3 weeks after I started my job, and it was a huge thing. Like up living our kids, we were like, does this make sense for us? Well, I didn't literally score it, but I had a framework in my mind that seemed to make sense. So when I was having a dialogue with my partner, this is what I'm concerned about. This is what I also could take into consideration, her needs and my kids' needs, my family's needs, and my friends' needs, and all these things. So I found it to be, this is something I found to be helpful. So, the very short answer to that, I hope, that question is that you should be able to, I think you should be able to understand and consider anything at any time based on how you feel about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And the one last piece I'll leave you with is that this is sort of personal branding. I guess it goes a little bit to that, Uber and Lyft piece, but the idea is, again, wanting to make our students and our alumni the preferred candidates for the jobs. How do you stick out? How do you sort of start that process? And making sure that people are both valuable to an organization, but also interesting and connected. I think those things are critical in concert with each other. And always asking these two questions: why are you valuable, and why are you interesting? Particularly from a career standpoint. I'll just skip that. So this was something that might be helpful as a tool as you start thinking about constructing a way of communicating what might be next for you. This is a tool that might be helpful in developing a bio, a tool that might be helpful in a personal statement. It might be helpful with a LinkedIn summary, or just a way to communicate to somebody else. But the reality is that to be able to engage with individuals and have something to share and connect with people on. So this sort of like, think about it as a conversation catalyst. So this is a Mad Lib for personal brand statement. So the idea is that within each of these boxes, or each of these open segments, you can add content. So in this particular case is that, what information could I put into this framework to illuminate my experience, my interests, my styles, and my value? So it's not necessarily a one-to-one relationship, but this might be something that you could use or construct as a starting point. And if you already have something like this is fine, but I think having some level of tool to recognize is that if you're having a conversation, you're connecting or having an informational interview, or even talking to faculty about, hey, what are you looking to do? Well, these are the kind of things that are interesting to me. These are the kind of things that I want to be working on. Here are the kind of industries that are important to me. Here's how I want to leverage what I've already got. Here's what I'm looking for in these options and opportunities. So it's a starting point. But what this framework is helpful in doing is recognizing it gives an audience the opportunity to engage you on whatever category they want to engage you on to start a dialogue. Because in the absence of information, it's hard to have a conversation. This is a way to sort of structure that information. It's how to take the work that I've done on myself and apply it directly into something of how I communicate that. And this becomes critical, is that technology is an amazing way to source career opportunities. You're just 10 times more likely to get a job through a relationship. So the idea is that I can put this and write this somewhere else, but I can also have a dialogue about this. Oh, you're interested in product management in healthcare and biotech? What are you interested in? Conversation starter. Oh, what kind of design experience do you have? Oh, great. Oh, you're looking for socially conscious? Well, how about these things? So I think it gives somebody new to you, and this isn't just new to us. This is people in our universes. One thing I will say from a career planning and management standpoint, and we sort of talked about that Reach 360 about engaging other people. One is asking information, sort of early on, but the other thing is how often our biggest advocates are the ones that have the least clarity in who we are, what we're trying to do. So for instance, if I asked your friends and family and to say, who is this person? What do you think they'd like to do? How accurate would their assessment be? And would they be able to do anything with that and communicate that to somebody else? Depending on your own comfort level, just recognizing the fact that how often the people in our lives that are advocates can be helpful, and making sure that they are the ones that they also know what you're looking for. And I would consider your classmates too. You're like, this is what I'd really like, but in order to have those conversations, this is where your own due diligence matters. Like, I'd love to work for this organization. What does that organization do? Well, it does this, 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 and this. Oh, I don't know anybody, but you should talk to Chris. Chris knows something about that organization. So this really, from an overarching perspective, this is just all about what information do I gather and where do I put it so I can make decisions faster. And I would say more thoughtfully. And that's important to me. I'm grateful for the fact that this is what I get to do professionally, and that it'll get to align with what happens. And that from a career planning standpoint, a career services standpoint, is that we are a resource here for you. It's like, technically you paid for it. Like we're here at your discretion to be able to navigate these places and to be able to use the tools and resources at your level of comfort, and at your need. I would just recognize from a planning process standpoint, the earlier you start this, the easier the rest of it becomes. So we are doing all our programming virtually this year. But we do have a presence at Dowling. There's usually 1 or 2 people there every day, should you have any questions. But everything else is virtual. And my email's at the bottom. And I would use me, our team, employee relations folks, however we can to serve you in the way that's going to make your career blossom is what we're hoping to do. And with that, I'm open to any and all questions or conversations about this or any other career topic.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was both like a kind of deep dive into some of those topics and really comprehensive across a lot of things that I somehow still haven't learned about or found on the career website. It is 1:30, but if you do have any questions, we can definitely discuss it now. Or, I'm not going to throw Matt under the bus here, but I believe you can set up an appointment virtually with him for.
Yeah, handshake is fine. I have time if people have any conversations right now, certainly for a while. But handshake is the easiest way to set an appointment with me. If you don't see appointment availability on handshake in the time horizon that you're looking for, my request is that you send me 1 to 2 weeks of availability, and I do my very best to find time on my schedule.
I have a very quick question.
Sure.
Most of your conversation was focused on the private sector and finding jobs in the industry or the private sector. Do you believe that the same suggestions can be applied for the public
It's a
For
great
example,
question.
if you
Yes.
think about health.
Yeah. So this process, I believe, is skill agnostic, industry agnostic, technology agnostic, market agnostic. The exact same process fits whether or not you're looking for a government job, an NGO job, international job, a for-profit, a nonprofit, a volunteer role. All of those things fit it. It's the same questions are being asked, the same interests that are being perceived. There may be different ways in which those organizations hire talent, but I think those focus more on the tactical piece. But to get to the decision-making criteria, it's understanding if I want to, it's nonprofit would be a criteria, within the evaluation process, But I would move even farther. It's like if it's not, what is it about the nonprofit world? What is it specific? And it is because when you have doing that, is that is it the very nature of the organization nonprofits reinvest their revenue into their businesses. Private businesses typically use that to sell stock or grow their organization. So it's really thinking about what that organization does and how it does it. But the reality is this whole system fits all of it.
I don't want to rush anyone's thinking process because it is a Friday afternoon. I feel like some of us are under caffeinated.
Totally.
But maybe in the interest of time, we could just thank Matt again for a really interesting and very informative workshop. And hopefully we can do something like this again. I thought this was super helpful and I know you said you used some slides over from previous presentations, but I still think this was really unique from the other workshops that I've attended, which I've all found useful, but like this was a different perspective. So it's kind of cool.
Good. I'm glad. It's trying to make this I know it's a huge amount of information to digest. Try to caveat that at the beginning of the conversations. For a lot of this stuff, even from the questions I've asked today are probably questions that may have never been asked before. One of the recommendations that I always have with something like this is do not spend any more time today thinking about any of this. And it may be hard, but the reality is that it's the wonderful element of the brain is our brains are going to process this information whether or not we're paying attention to it or not. But the reality is, I think being intentional about not having intention on it will let your mind do what it's supposed to do. And this is the thing with career planning, especially at the beginning, and something to recognize. And even if you're talking to other students that are interested in career planning, is that, we start talking about this sort of discovery work, it's really hard because your brain is firing in different ways. And it's also very tiring. So this particular presentation may not be exhausting, but just recognizing the fact is that when you sort of ask questions that are different than what is sort of mainstreamed, it's a different way. I think it can be a different way of framing and thinking. So my recommendation is just do what you have to do. And I hope, I know this is a massive data dump, and trying to evolve presentations that are, can be more tactical and more interactive. I think this is a service in which you can do a lot of things after this presentation. That is my hope. But any feedback you have today, like through this thing or through Jessica or the rest of your team, anytime, any place, we're trying to improve our services all the time anyways, and particularly in this sort of virtual environment. So if there's anything that we can do or we can do better, please let us know.
Yeah. And we'll make this recording available. I'll send it to you as well, Matt, so you can share it.
Oh, wonderful.
Like on the Career Center website or any of the social media platforms. And that way people can think about it later. People who couldn't attend the workshop can still get all the insights that we managed to get today. So thank you again. And I hope everyone has a great weekend, except people in my lab whom I'll be seeing in, another couple hours for a 3-hour meeting, I'm sure. But thanks again for coming.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
You're very welcome. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody.